Nightbreed. This is going to be a long one. Welcome to Maniac Movies LLC. I do updates Wednesdays and Fridays, and this is the one I referenced in my last update that I wasn't going to do because a channel I follow very closely, Sinister Cinema, announced they were doing it. Then it turned out the dude who runs the channel, Jason, didn't like the movie. So I'm going to do this. So this is a big video. I'm going to do the multiple cuts. There's the theatrical, the director, the Cabal cut. I'm going to talk about the comics. I'm going to talk about the companion novel that Clive Barker wrote, which is called the Nightbreed Chronicles, the original Cabal. I'm going to even talk about, I was at the premiere of the Cabal cut. I was at the world premiere of the Cabal cut when it came out about 8 years ago now. It's actually referenced in the little booklet that came with the Blu-ray special edition. I was there at that screening. It's the longest I've ever waited in line to see a movie. But yeah, so I'm a huge fan of this movie, obviously. So let's jump right into Clive Barker's second feature.
Who's buried in Midian?
Ain't nothing but dead folk.
Somewhere, hidden from sight, closer than you might think, is a place that's not on any map. Midian.
Something's breeding there.
So everyone knows the backstory of Clive Barker, that he was a very successful author and a fairly successful guy as a playwright. Oh, I'm wearing my Dr. Decker t-shirt because Dr. Decker is an awesome villain. So Clive Barker was a very successful playwright who became successful for writing a series of short stories that Stephen King was very impressed with in the Books of Blood. That got his foot in the door with the industry. He got Hellraiser off the ground. But the thing you got to remember about him is that when he went to make Hellraiser, he literally went to a library to try and check out a book about how to direct. Yeah, he was very much a novice. He really didn't know what he was doing. And on Hellraiser, it's been said that on the first day on set, he came in and said, "So who's in charge here?" And they're like, you. And apparently Hellraiser, his DP, really took him by the hand and guided him through that movie. And Hellraiser turned into a colossal hit. It was a cultural phenomenon. I mean, it was a very low-budget film that proved to be very, very financially successful. And the studio, the American studios, their ears pricked up. They're like, "Hey, we can make money off of you." And so they put together Nightbreed for him because, Hellraiser was a small movie that had a ton of merchandise, and that was a big thing that they wanted. Nightbreed was supposed to be the Star Wars of horror films. They kept saying that the Star Wars of horror films. We're going to have t-shirts, action figures, Halloween masks, magazines, a long-running comic book series. It ran for 3 years. People always describe that as a short-running comic book series, but 3 years is pretty long for a movie tie-in, for God's sake. I mean, most movie tie-ins are like 6 issues and they're done. But regardless, they really wanted this to be a big thing. They wanted this was a little bit like when Tobe Hooper got handed that movie Life Force. This was supposed to be the big budget blockbuster. And I gotta think that at Warner Brothers, they maybe didn't even watch Hellraiser, and I'm not even kidding, because like if you watch Clive Barker's stuff, if you read his stuff, you know that this guy, he was never going to be Stephen King. I know Stephen King said this is the face of, what do you say, the new face of horror or something, but he was never going to have that kind of broad appeal. His stuff is too strange, it's too esoteric, it's too sexual, it's too built upon outsidery interests. His interest in S&M, for instance, was a big part of Hellraiser. So yeah, Clive Barker was never going to be Stephen King, but like I said, I don't think Warner Brothers knew much about Clive Barker when they hired him. I think they said this guy's got a lot of heat around him. Hellraiser made a lot of money. It sold action figures. It sold t-shirts. We're going to make money off of this guy. And they kind of gave him a lot of freedom to make the movie he wanted to make, and then they saw the movie and they're like, "Oh dear God, what have we done?" So I'm mostly going to be discussing the director's cut because that's the closest thing we've got to Clive Barker's preferred version of the movie. It's not Clive Barker's preferred version of the movie. It's still a compromised film. The fact of the matter is that the elements don't exist for Clive Barker's preferred version of the movie. I mean, it would be kind of like the Snyder cut of Justice League. They would have to go back and refilm stuff and reshoot stuff and get new special effects. And I mean, this all happened, 21 years, I believe, after the movie's theatrical release. That was impossible. It just wasn't going to happen. It would have been the equivalent of just remaking the whole movie. So yeah, the story concerns Aaron Boone, played by Craig Sheffer. And the Clive Barker fans, Craig Sheffer is always going to be the cop from Hellraiser 5, Hellraiser Inferno, which is kind of considered to be maybe the last good Hellraiser movie, directed by Scott Derrickson, dude who did Doctor Sleep and Sinister. And Hellraiser Inferno is a pretty solid movie. It's a little clunky, but I mean, for a straight-to-DVD movie, it's way above average. And Craig Sheffer's a pretty good actor. He had a little bit of heat around his career by the time Nightbreed came along, so he was sort of an up-and-coming guy. Apparently, they tried to get a couple other better-known actors and weren't able to get him. Christopher Lambert was even considered from Highlander. He was even considered in... I can't imagine that. Craig Sheffer is actually very good in this role. He's quite a bit different than the way Boone was described in the novel Cabal. Boone was supposed to be a very awkward and uncomfortable guy. And Craig Sheffer, is chiseled movie star, good looks, handsome, well built, and got his cool guy leather jacket on. So he's an outsider more in the kind of James Dean sense than the I don't know, the dweeby Spider-Man sense. It works, but in a different way, and it's more theatrical. So Sheffer plays Boone, and Boone is a guy who's haunted by dreams of Midian, the place where the monsters go. And he's been in therapy for this with a guy named Dr. Philip Decker, played by David Cronenberg, the man, the godfather of body horror, whose son recently had that hit with Possessor. But Cronenberg has a long filmography as a director. He's a very successful filmmaker, Videodrome, The Fly, A History of Violence. He's dropped off a bit with his last few movies, but he was a great director, and I think he's fantastic in this movie. I really like him in this movie. He's very subtly creepy and weird. He's got that urban yuppie quality to him, where his hair is just so, and he's got his little suit and tie. He's like, "Hello, Cheryl Ann. How are you doing today?" It's like, either you're gonna try to sell me insurance, or you're gonna stab me in the goddamn throat. So I love Cronenberg, and this is by far the meatiest role I've ever seen him in. I mean, he's normally a guy who just does little cameos, but Clive Barker apparently asked him as a favor, like, "I think you're this character. I think this is perfect for you," and he absolutely is. And Cronenberg even told Barker, like, "I don't really like the script. This isn't my kind of thing." And Barker was like, I don't care, dude. You want to do it. And he did it. Like Cronenberg, when he was in Jason X, the 10th Friday the 13th movie, Jason in Space, like that was just a favor for a friend. Usually when he has a role, it's usually a very small part. It's always pretty much a favor, but Barker sweet talked him into doing this one leading role in his entire career. So he's in therapy with Dr. Decker. And Decker has been... Oh, okay, well, the thing is that in the theatrical cut, Decker, you don't know immediately, but Decker is Doll Eyes. He is a serial killer. And he is brainwashing Boone into believing he is the serial killer. So he's been giving Boone LSD, he's been hypnotizing him, and he's been trying to put this idea in his head. In the meantime, Boone is in a relationship with this sort of lounge singer named Lori, played by Ann Bobby, who's a pretty good singer. So, and Ann Bobby has a very small filmography behind her. She's mostly done very minor stuff. She's quasi-retired now. But, yeah, so, and Laurie's very supportive. She's a sweet girlfriend type character, but the theatrical cut really does her a disservice. Now, in the director's cut, she is a full-formed character. You don't even really get that she's a singer in the theatrical cut. But she actually encourages Boone to go back to Decker when Decker starts calling him again. Boone has said that, I'm fine, I feel okay, all I got is the nightmares. I still have these dreams about these monsters in Midian. And she says, well, go talk to Decker and see what he has to say. And against his better judgment, he goes, and Decker basically lays it all out, like, there's a serial killer that is murdering families. You have described all of this to me under hypnosis. And Boone says, I don't remember. And Decker's like, you did it. Like, there's nothing I can do. I'm going to the cops. And he hands Boone some pills and turns Boone loose. And Boone, trusting his therapist, assumes that he is actually insane. And in a scene that's only in the director's cut, he goes to see Laurie perform, and it's actually it's a great and it's a bad scene at the same time. I love the scene because you get a lot of acting out of Craig Sheffer in this. You can see how horrified and how sad Boone is, because he knows he can't be with her anymore. Because as far as he's concerned, he is a killer. He's done. He's either going to jail. He's not safe to be around. And you see all that in his face when he's watching her perform. But this scene isn't in the theatrical cut. But the song she's performing is so wrong, and this scene kind of shows you Clive Barker's inexperience. So she's singing a song called Johnny Get Angry by, I believe, Katie Lang, and it's a very up-tempo song. Like, there's even a part when the audience starts clapping along with the song. It is completely, tonally wrong for this moment. Like, in Boone's evolution, he is falling apart. He is crying in the crowd, watching the woman he loves for what he believes to be the last time. And they're singing that. And also, it's a scene that is not going to age well. Anyone who watched this scene can say, yeah, this is going to be dated in about 10 minutes. So right there, you kind of see that Barker, he has great ideas, but he was just in over his head on this movie, and that shows quite a few times where there's just things in this movie that he did that he just shouldn't have done. But I love this movie, so I accept that it's flawed. I still consider it an A plus. It's a movie I love. Clive Barker only directed 3 movies: Hellraiser, Nightbreed, and Lord of Illusions. I consider them to be in that order. Hellraiser's the best, Nightbreed's second best, Lord of Illusions third, but they're all great. So there are little issues like that throughout Nightbreed, but I can forgive that. In the meantime, you've seen Decker just straight up obliterate a family in a really brutal scene that ends with him going after a little boy who's just streaming tears as he watched this killer who's just murdered his parents walk up the stairs with a creepy ass button eye mask and this long dagger that he likes to carry. It's a harsh scene. And all of it's to this really intense Danny Elfman score. Danny Elfman, who scored basically everything Tim Burton's ever done. So it's a good scene, and I like it a lot. I think Nightbreed is kind of a monster movie, an action movie, a horror movie, and a slasher movie, all sort of at the same time. You could even argue it's also a gothic romance. This is a very, very ambitious film. So everything jumps off from Decker being a serial killer trying to convince Boone that he's the killer, and Boone's decision to commit suicide, which he does so unsuccessfully, believing that he's a murderer. He wakes up in a hospital, and just so happens the guy that's in the room with him is Narcissi. And Narcissi is a failed actor desperate to reach Midian as well. So Narcissi tells Boone, who knows about Midian, who's heard about it around town, and it's where the monsters go. And at this point, Boone feels like, well, this is where I should be. I'm a monster. I should go to Midian. Narcissi is also desperate to go to Midian, but is also crazy. And Narcissi has these cool little finger knives, which he uses to scalp himself. He just rips chunks of flesh off his head to prove to Boone that he belongs in Midian. And at this exact moment, Decker is arriving with the cops, who he is told, this is my patient. I'm a respected therapist. I'm telling you, this patient has confessed to me. So Boone kind of is horrified, and it's a very good gory scene. He backs out. He says they need help, and there's all this chaos and confusion and all of it. The only person who's remaining calm is Decker, who just gives him this completely dead expression, starts walking towards him, and Boone just bolts. He's out. He's going to Midian. Narcissi told him where Midian is. So Boone jumps and just hauls ass straight to Midian. Now in the book, Midian's a whole city. In the movie, budgetary reasons, it's just a cemetery. But Boone goes to Midian. And once he gets there, he basically passes out. Now, Midian is a massive Gothic cemetery. It's huge, big sculptures, very ornate, but also very old and overgrown. So when he gets there, he pretty quickly falls asleep, wakes up, and hears strange sounds, strange noises, strange voices. And then he's jumped by Kinski and Peliquin. Kinski, whose head is shaped like a crescent moon, there's a whole backstory behind that, where in the Nightbreed Chronicles, Clive Barker wrote a backstory for basically every major monster in the movie, and even some of the human characters. And Kinski's backstory is that after being spurned by a lover, he wanted to reshape his features, but he was in a daze after taking this drug that was supposed to allow him to rebuild his face the way he wanted it, and he saw the crescent moon and built his face in the shape of a crescent moon by mistake. And then Peliquin is with him, and Peliquin's, the monster. He's the true beast in Nightbreed. He is a flesh-eating, badass monster played by Oliver Parker. Now, Oliver Parker, for fans of Hellraiser, was one of the 2 movers, the kind of handsome mover at the beginning of the first Hellraiser and then at the end of the second one. So, Peliquin corners Boone, and, he wants to eat him. And Kinski keeps saying, no, it's the law. We are not allowed to eat human flesh. And Peliquin straight up says, fuck the law. I want meat. Just takes a chunk out of Boone's shoulder. Boone hauls ass. He gets cornered by the cops. Decker comes out. And it's half a dozen police cars. They've all tracked Boone to this cemetery because Decker extracted the information from Narcissi as he was dying. So Decker comes out and says, we all understand what's going on. Just surrender. And then he goes, he's got a gun. Dives out of the way. The cops shoot Boone all to hell. He's lying. Boone didn't have a gun. But Boone did conveniently have a wound under his jacket, which allowed Decker to say, well, he reached into his jacket. I don't know. It's funny because I described this movie to a girl I was dating one time, and I described the beginning, and she was like, "So you just gave away the whole movie?" It's like, no, no, that's like the first 15 minutes. A lot happens in this movie because that's all just set up for what is ultimately a movie about humans versus monsters, and of course, the question of who is the real monster in this story. So, Laurie is told that Boone was a serial killer and that he's dead now, which she can't believe, and she decides she wants to see where he died to kind of try and reach some sort of closure. In the meantime, Boone has been resurrected and is broken out of the morgue, and there's this great scene where they're looking at his leather jacket, which has about a half dozen holes in it. And Jesus, they weren't taking any chances. So Boone is with the Breed in Midian. Decker is trying to figure out why Boone's corpse disappeared. Laurie is just trying to come to terms with her heartbreak. And then the rest of the movie happens. So has a lot of special effects. It has a lot of monsters in it. And once Boone reaches is with the Breed, he's allowed to meet all these different creatures. Now, the Nightbreed is not one consistent race. It is actually many different races that have all come together under this, banner of the Nightbreed. They call themselves the Tribes of the Moon, so it's not one tribe but many. And these should all be considered as essentially different races, but also many of them are just plain out freaks. They're anomalies. They're genetic mutations. So when Boone reaches the Breed, he's told by Narcissi, who has already been dead and has been adopted in the Breed as well, that this is where we belong. No place else would take us. And that's kind of what the Breed is about. They're all there, and their god is Baphomet, who is this living statue that's unfinished. There are pieces of him missing in the basement. So, Boone becomes indoctrinated with Kinski's help, because I guess Kinski kind of felt bad about Peliquin, his buddy Peliquin, trying to eat Boone. So Boone is allowed to join the Breed by Lylesburg. Lylesburg is the boss. They call him Moses later on, which is kind of funny because Midian is a reference to Moses biblically. Clive Barker often drew inspiration from the Bible. So, but Lylesburg is Doug Bradley, who played Pinhead, and as much makeup as Doug Bradley had as Pinhead is nothing compared to how much makeup he has playing Lylesburg, because Doug Bradley was probably only about 35 when this movie was made, and they wanted to make him look about 80. So he is buried under prosthetics. He has all these little slits on his cheek. And he is the last of Baphomet's keepers, which has kind of made him the boss by default. And he's an overly cautious boss. He fears humans, and he preaches that, the Breed and the Naturals just don't mix. That the Breed were virtually driven to extinction by the humans, which they call the Naturals. And we even see that at the beginning of the movie, where Peliquin, when he follows Boone, he chases Boone all the way to the gates of the cemetery above Midian. And then he stops and says there's something natural, and he just turns and runs away. And that's actually sort of an unintentionally comical scene, because Peliquin and Kinski turning tail and running when they smell the cops. It looks like the Little Rascals after they broke a window, like, oh shit, guys, run away. And that's what I mean by Clive Barker including things that probably shouldn't have been included. We didn't really need to see them just run off. It demystifies them a bit. And even then, like the scene that just flashed behind me, the scene where they're in the chamber, where Lylesburg, baptizes Boone and says, you've been indoctrinated in the Tribes of the Moon. It's a really shitty looking chamber. Like, it's just a little stone room, which is weird because they had such an amazing, huge set for Midian. So why is this chamber just this little rag-ass hole in the wall with a little fountain thing? Yeah, that's what I mean, is that there's mistakes here. There's mistakes were made while making this movie. It feels like the film was made in a somewhat short-sighted way, that they were kind of piecing it together as they went. They weren't sure how it would fit together in the long run. So Decker, of course, is following Laurie, assuming that he will somehow figure out what happened to Boone by following her. And Decker just straight up eradicates her new best friend, this girl she meets at a bar named Cheryl Ann. And Decker corners Laurie, rips his mask off and says, good question, how do I know you? Well, this is the answer. And it's weird because the way he takes off the mask is he does it by grabbing it by the mouth. And it's just creepy little details like that make David Cronenberg's Decker such a fantastic villain. So Decker chases Laurie into the cemetery above Midian, and Boone knows what's going on. Everyone in Midian knows what's going on. They're all very sensitive to what's going on above them. And Boone says, I'm not going to let him kill her. And Louwsburg says, no, we do not mix with the naturals. She's not one of us. He's not one of us. You're not one of them. We're staying uninvolved. And Boone essentially fights his way out. And it's a not very well staged fight sequence, but that's fine. So Boone goes up and he basically fights Decker off, but Laurie sees Narcissi, Boone's new best friend, who's missing his entire scalp and the sides of his head because he's ripped the skin off of him. And she freaks out, so Boone has to stop, and Boone has this thing where he still looks human, except when he kind of intakes the spirit of the breed, because he's very similar to Pelican in that respect. Now, Pelican just goes from being a monster to being an even more intense-looking monster, but Boone goes from looking human to looking like a monster by breathing in the spirit of the breed and having all these tribal carvings in his flesh all of a sudden. But Boone goes to comfort Laurie. And Laurie's already seen some of the breed. She interacted with Louwsburg and Rachel and Rachel's daughter Babette, who's half canine. And that's in the Nightbreed Chronicles. She is half canine. Rachel, who is a shapeshifter, which means that she's half human looking, but she can also turn into mist. Now, Babette, her daughter, is half human, but she can transform into a canine because her father was actually essentially a werewolf. So, and the actress who played Rachel's voice was dubbed that Eastern European voice. Yeah, you can hear it in some of the deleted scenes in the Blu-ray. Doug Bradley's voice was actually dubbed for the theatrical version with a German actor that no one can remember the name of, but he was allowed to put his normal voice back into the director's cut, except for randomly like 2 lines, which is really distracting. But I do prefer Doug Bradley's performance as Louwsburg. And Louwsburg, of course, tells Rachel that what stays below, what is below stays below, and then he kind of leaves. But then Laurie tried to follow him in, and Pelican jumped her and just kind of scared her off. So Laurie doesn't really want anything to do with the breed because, Pelican was very aggressive towards her and basically looked like he was going to attack her, but then kind of let it go presumably because there were a bunch of witnesses around this time, so he couldn't really get away with it. So Laurie runs away, and she doesn't want anything to do with the breed. Boone has been exiled because he broke their law. He interacted with a natural, and they say that, Decker is a threat. He could lead our enemies to us. So Boone and Laurie have to leave. So they go hide out at this hotel, and Decker has figured out what's going on. And Decker uses his connections with the police that he had led to believe that Boone was a serial killer to get the local PD, which is led by Chief Eigerman, who's a psychotic redneck played by Charles Hayde, to go to Midian and check it out. So while they're at Midian, Decker goes to Midian with the cops, and it's just a few of them. It's his buddy that he was going to have arrest Boone, and then a few of the local cops. They see Aranka, the 100-year-old boy, as he's described in the Nightbreed Chronicles, and that actor played the Butterball Cenobite in Hellraiser. That's kind of cool. Kinski, the one with the crescent moon-shaped head, was actually the Chatterer. So Aranka is doing his own thing, but he's grabbed by the cops, and Aranka is killed by the sunlight. Yeah, that's a really harsh scene because the cops are just brutal to this guy, and this guy is a very meek person. Like he's only breed in that he doesn't age like a normal person. He's 100 years old, and he still looks like he's 30, and he has the mind of a child. But Aranka is killed by the cops, and he explodes, and it's a really sad scene. It's very well scored because this is a completely helpless individual that's just being beaten to death and dies a horrible and painful death. And Decker, of course, is unmoved by this. We've seen Decker. Like, Decker is a straight-up murderer. Like, he says, "I am death," plain and simple. Like, Decker is like I said, I really like Decker as a villain. His explanation for why he kills. He's not even homicidal. He's genocidal. He hates human beings. He says, I've wiped out a lot of breeders in my day. Filth, making filth, and I did it over and over again, but it was all leading me here. I was born to destroy the breed. Like he considers the breed to be the ultimate malformity. Like, Decker's basically a Nazi, which works out because it looks like in a flashback sequence, the breed were eradicated during the Spanish Inquisition. It's kind of hard to tell, but that's what it looks like, is that the breed were tortured to death during the Spanish Inquisition, and what was left was, very few. And Rachel even says that your tribes drove our tribes to the brink of extinction. So yeah, that kind of sets up the big finale of the movie, where it's basically a bunch of this redneck, heavily armed posse versus the Nightbreed. Now they can't quite figure out what Boone is because he doesn't have a heartbeat and he won't die. So they enlist a priest who's an alcoholic, and in the book he's also a cross-dresser, but they left that out of the movie. But they enlist a priest who is somewhat reluctant. He doesn't really understand what's going on, but he's very easily bullied by Eigerman, the cop. So Decker has got his apocalyptic event. He's happy. He's got all his cops. They are going to destroy the Nightbreed. He's going to get Boone. He's going to kill everybody. So this is what he wanted. And there's this great moment because when the cops attack Midian, they just rig the whole cemetery up with explosive charges and blow the place the hell up. And you see the breed cowering beneath, because that's the important thing to remember about the Nightbreed is that they're very strange, but most of them are not aggressive in the least. Peliquin is actually the only one when the cops arrive that initially wants to fight back, and it's this great moment where he's kind of sitting there as the place is blowing up around his ear, is falling down around him, and he's just getting more and more angry. He's getting like, and he runs up and he attacks, and he gets his ass kicked. Like, he's just a guy. The breed do not have weapons. And that's why I always kind of thought this was an analogy for, the settlers versus the natives in America. But Clive Barker has said it should be considered persecution of homosexuals in the gay community, which I don't really see, and I do wonder if maybe that's something he decided later, because to me, you could really apply almost anything to Nightbreed. Because it's essentially just a story of outsiders, of strange people, but not, for the most part, not malicious or violent, being persecuted by a heavily armed other that considers themselves to be morally righteous. Keep in mind, they bring a priest with them. Now, they don't treat the priest very well, but they do. They even, like, Eigerman just slaps him and calls him a faggot at one point, which I guess is probably about all that was left over of him being a cross-dresser from, I don't think that's the preferred term anymore, transvestite from the book.
They have only one enemy, a beast called man, sworn to destroy the Nightbreed.
Sounds like we're going head-to-head with the devil himself.
But that's kind of what's going on. You have the massive battle of Midian that happens after this. Eigerman and his cops just kind of destroy the place, and Boone rallies the troops because the breed had been raised to believe that you stay away from naturals. The naturals will destroy you. That's what Lyles Barber's laws. That's what he's taught them. Even as the place is being destroyed, he keeps saying, no, stay down here. And Boone kind of says, we cannot just stay here and wait to be killed. We've got to, at one point, he's getting the breed together, and he says, you're not cattle, for God's sake. Fight back. If you can't do it for yourselves, do it for your children, because the breed do have children. When we see children, that's even a big sticking point for the priest, as he says, you're killing children, and he tries to stand up to Eigerman. At that point, Eigerman basically just bitch slaps him, and Boone saves the priest. But then he has this great moment where Boone grabs the priest and says, we don't like priests here. That was a good line. So, at the big final conflict between Boone and Decker, Decker kills Boone's best friend, Narcissi, and throws his decapitated head at Boone. Their final battle is a little underwhelming. It's cool, the stunt work, where they're kind of crashing through the ceiling of Midian and then all these rope bridges that they had built throughout the city. But then it's ultimately, Decker's just not much of a match for Boone, because Boone is essentially immortal and Decker's just a guy with a bunch of knives. It's also been pointed out by David Cronenberg that he didn't think his stunt double was a good double for him, and if you watch closely, during some of the scenes during the final fight between Boone and Decker is suddenly jacked. Like, David Cronenberg's a completely average build, but then his stunt double was really big, and Cronenberg's like, yeah, suddenly I'm built like a linebacker in a few scenes in this movie. So, Boone has the final fight with Decker, then goes to Baphomet, and Baphomet tells him that, essentially, you were born to destroy Midian, but no home is forever. You need to find us a new home. Your new name is Cabal. You belong to the breed. And then he has this final moment with Laurie, which is only in the director's cut, where Laurie tells him that I want to come with you, and Boone says, you can't. Like, this is too dangerous. And, the whole macho action thing that was pretty common in the 80s and early 90s, and she kills herself and says that if you want to be with me, she stabs herself, she's going to die, then you have to bite me. And he does, and it ends with them embracing, which is kind of hokey, honestly, but again, there are flaws in this movie.
It's time to fight! Go get 'em, boys!
So as far as Nightbreed's resemblance to Clive Barker's original vision, I mean, it's really not that dramatically different, honestly. Like I said, the Nightbreed were supposed to be a bit more passive, a bit less ferocious. Really, it was only supposed to be Pelican that was violent. Decker was supposed to be a little less prominent, and he was also supposed to actually be schizophrenic, like he was in the novel. In the movie, they ultimately went with the idea that he's more just evil, and I prefer that, honestly. I think the idea that he was just being told what to do by his mask because he was insane, it makes the character a little less interesting and a little bit less, like I said, a little less malicious, a little bit less dark. Because if he's just mentally ill, then he's just mentally ill. We also didn't get the stop animation stuff that Clive Barker wanted to include because the studio felt it was just too outdated. There was a little bit of that on the special features, at least on the limited edition special features. And we didn't get to see Boone be bare-ass naked for the whole end of the movie. That was supposed to happen in the book. He is completely naked and completely covered in tribal carvings. But yeah, this is really pretty close to what Clive Barker intended. Like I said, the bigger issue, also the ending, of course, with Eigerman being dead and the priest going out to hunt the breed, but which is also different from the book. So this kind of has three different endings if you want to go with the book, the movie, or the director's cut of the movie. But yeah, the bigger issue with this movie is just that this was a very troubled production, and it shows. It was being constantly reshot. They were adding new things, adding new characters, and dropping ideas, adding ideas. There's a guy named Mark Frost who was a co-creator on Twin Peaks who was even claimed to have heavily rewritten the screenplay at some point. I don't think Clive Barker's really spoken out about that, so my guess would be he was just a script doctor. He came in to kind of change a few things around here and there. But yeah, what we got in the director's cut is kind of an unpolished version, because it's an unpolished version of what Clive Barker intended, and it's very close. It's as close as we're frankly ever going to get.
Of your deepest fears and your darkest fantasies, Clive Barker brings you a startling new breed of adventure.
So, like I said, I really like this movie. I think it's a very ambitious, a very smart movie. It's got a great score by Danny Elfman. The makeup effects are good, but they're not always photographed well. And what I mean by that is, if you've ever watched a movie, like even some movies that, like some of the masters of special effects, like Tom Savini or Stan Winston did, if it's not lit properly, if it's not shot properly, it doesn't look quite right. And there are parts of this movie where the makeup effects just don't look quite right. They look a little rubbery. And again, I think that just speaks to Clive Barker's lack of experience behind the camera, in the same way that certain shots don't really work in this movie, and then other shots are absolutely phenomenal. There's some very, very cool stuff in this movie, and there's other things like Lori, when she walks through Midian for the first time and she sees all these monsters just going about their lives, and it's just so much weirdness, and it's a lot of cool, strange stuff. But at the same time, there are other things that, like certain special effects, that again just don't really work. The narrative is a little clunky in places because it tends to lose Boone and Lori. Like, Boone and Lori become very reactive characters at some points in the movie. So they'll kind of not be super prominent and then be really, really important. The character of Eigerman, who isn't in the whole first half of the movie and then is completely essential to, building the Redneck Posse and destroying Midian in the second half. Yeah, it's weird how he's suddenly a lead character. Yeah, and honestly, it would have made more sense if Decker's cop buddy, who's in the whole first chunk of the movie, working with him, the black guy, was also Eigerman. Those didn't need to be two separate characters. Now, I realized that character, the black character, Manners, was originally supposed to live and kind of embrace the breed and understand the error of his ways. That didn't happen. And Manners isn't always an underwritten character. He never does enough. So I think it's fine that they just ended up saying, Decker can just kill him about halfway through. So yeah, like I said, the movie moves and starts and stops, but it's still it's such a singular movie. It's such a unique movie. It's got a lot of really memorable characters and visuals, the monsters. It would be hard to find another studio movie with this much weird in it and this much monster in it. Like if you pointed at aliens, well, there's basically just all aliens. Then you have the queen alien. Like, this is all unique, strange creatures, and it's really cool, and it's really dark, and it's really violent, and of course the studio hated it because they said it was immoral, that this is a movie that invites you to root for the monsters instead of the humans. And it was actually the studio that pushed to include more aggressive monsters, because originally it was really just Pelican. Pelican was the only monster that was really comfortable with fighting back until the Berserkers were introduced at the very end. So, they wanted Shuna Sassy, the porcupine lady, as I always called her. They wanted Lude, the demon guy. Leroy Gom, the fat guy with the snake things that come out of his stomach. Those were all things that the studio wanted added in after the fact. And all of those characters have backstories. Like Shuna Sassy was a prostitute who was kind of the ultimate dominatrix, because just to touch her wrong would kill you because her quills are poisonous. Lude was the result of a nun being tricked into sex with a demon. And Leroy Gom was the result of heavy incest in a wealthy family, eventually creating a monster, an abomination, a genetic malformity so vile that it essentially cut off the bloodline. So yeah, and Clive Barker, like I said, he released the Nightbreed Chronicles, which covered backstories for a lot of these characters. Even the drummer, that weird drummer with a tusk that's always against the wall. Like, there's a whole backstory written for him where he was a race so ugly that they didn't like being in each other's presence, so they would communicate by pounding on the ground for each other. So there's a lot of backstory. Of course, this was supposed to be a trilogy, but then the first movie wasn't successful, and Clive Barker had all kinds of issues with the studio, which eventually just kind of soured him to the whole idea of it, so he wasn't even interested in continuing the story after that. So yeah, you get a lot out of Nightbreed. Of course, there are 3 cuts. You have the theatrical cut, which is good. I mean, it's solid. The director's cut, the best thing you get out of the director's cut, really, is just that it expands on the characters of Boone and Laurie. Laurie especially, because Laurie's actually in the theatrical cut a very boring girlfriend character. She's nothing. She's just the girlfriend. The director's cut gives her a lot of little character moments that add to her and give her a personality. Then there's the Cabal cut. And the Cabal cut was essentially a work print. It was built together by a guy who was trying to put together director's cut, and he just assembled all the footage he could find. And it is very rough. It has a lot of unfinished, unusable footage. And like I said, I was at the premiere of the Cabal that they premiered it at the Mad Monster Party. And it was a long line. It was the longest line I've ever seen for a movie. It's the longest I've ever waited to see a movie. It was packed. It was hosted by Ann Bobby and Craig Sheffer. And Ann Bobby was having a lot of fun. She even sang a whole damn song. Clive Barker was actually sick at the time, so he was unable to attend, which was a bummer. But it was cool. It was cool being part of that big crowd and kind of seeing this true assembly of what could have been for the first time. So you want to go with the director's cut if you're going to go with the version. It's better, not by a mile. I mean, honestly, because we don't really get exactly what Clive Barker intended, the director's cut is still kind of rough and unfinished. So it has some of the same issues that the theatrical cut did, in that it's kind of jumpy and kind of spotty. It's really mostly for fans that just want to get a better vision of these characters in this world. Then there's the extended media. So, the Nightbreed Chronicles is a really cool book. And like I said, Clive Barker wrote this, and he wrote character bios for most of the major figures in it. And it gives you a lot more, even really minor characters. It gives you a lot more idea of what's going on. And then there was the comic book series. The comic book series, which I love this cover. This is the first issue. This is a great cover. I'd love to get this as a poster. But it ran for I believe 26 or 25 issues. And for 25 issues, I have all of them. And the first couple issues are just an adaptation of the movie, and then it continued the story past that. Supposedly, Clive Barker had a little bit to do with it, but not a lot. So initially, it is continuing the story of Nightbreed with Aaron, Boone, and Laurie, and then being hunted by Eigerman and the priest. And it's kind of a confusing narrative, because they kind of had to choose what ending they were going to go with, and the comics ended with Decker being dead. The theatrical version ends with Decker being resurrected, but the director's cut does not. Although the director's cut ends with Eigerman being killed, so it's sort of confusing on what they were going to end up going with. But they end up really kind of going with the ending of the book instead of either ending of the movie, because the book does end saying that Eigerman and the priest are going to continue to work together to try and hunt down the breed. That's not, like I said, that's not the ending of the theatrical cut or the director's cut, so the comic kind of go on their own tangent in that way. But it goes off with that, and Boone and Laurie is now part of the breed, and her ability as part of the breed is that she has ability to control things with music. She can hypnotize with music, which makes sense because she was a musician. So the comics pretty quickly dropped Boone and Laurie and kind of became about Peliquin, which was sort of a weird choice. There's this whole long arc in the comics where the Nightbreed are fighting Rawhead Rex from the Clive Barker movie and the short story Rawhead Rex. And it's all pretty heavily focused on Peliquin until the last couple issues where the breed finally are able to, well, they have to battle this demon monster that Eigerman and the priest become. And after that, they kind of settle in, I believe, the subways of New York, and this is going to be the breed's new home they've established. So Boone has led them to their new home, their new Midian. As far as extended law on Baphomet goes, Baphomet is supposedly a brother of the devil, and he was also cast down, and the whole reason he was originally constructing Midian was to build an army to storm heaven. I thought that was kind of a cool little idea. I guess that probably would have come into play in later sequels, which also would have really pissed off the studio to know that the god of the good guys is the devil's brother, and he hates heaven. He wants to destroy heaven. So yeah, a lot of interesting, weird stuff going on in this movie. It's a cool, unique, different kind of movie. It's very interesting, very memorable. Like I said, it is flawed. You got the Berserkers also. I forgot to mention them. The Berserkers, which were apparently a German Nazi failed experiment on creating super soldiers, essentially. Kind of like in the first Hellboy movie. But yeah, so it's a lot to do with Nightbreed. There's a lot of fun to be had. I love Shauna Sassy. One scene we never got to see is Peliquin having sex with Shauna Sassy, which is a shame because that would have been interesting. Shauna Sassy, the porcupine woman. So it's a weird, big, unique movie, and I'm not terribly surprised that Clive Barker didn't direct but one other feature, because even Lord of Illusions has a lot of flaws, and I think Hellraiser was kind of the right size for him. I think he needed to make smaller, more intimate movies, and these big, expansive films were just a little too hard for him to control all the moving parts on. I think he works better just as an author, and of course he's completely stopped doing horror in his fiction. He just does fantasy. Even that last Hellraiser novel, The Scarlet Gospels, wasn't really horror. But supposedly we're getting a Nightbreed TV series, which means nothing, because like everything is getting a TV series now. Event Horizon's getting a TV series. Friday the 13th is getting a TV series now. All that means is that someone's in a room dicking around with an idea. I don't see Nightbreed being a TV series. It could happen, but if it does, I feel like it's going to suck. So I kind of don't want it to. I would prefer a big budget remake, if anything, but then you'd have to get the right people to make it. And I would rather see a remake of Nightbreed than Hellraiser, but what we have is what we have, and we got a great, unique cult horror movie. It's very distinctive, and for the people that love it, like me, they really love it. And maybe it doesn't work for other people, but I think every horror fan should at least watch it once, because how many times do you get to say that the monsters are the good guys, and the humans are all rednecks and psychopaths? It's a good time. Alright, so next update will be next week. I'll have it up Wednesday, and I haven't decided what it's going to be yet. See you.